On the surface, it was a gesture of love, a glittering necklace laid in velvet, gifted from husband to wife. But behind palace doors, whispers swirled. Was it truly hers? Or was it merely on loan from a legacy that never accepted her? Before Diana ever wore it in public, it had already been earmarked for another, a woman waiting in the shadows. The fairy tale began, as so many do, with a presentation of splendor, blue velvet, white gloves, and a sapphire choker so deep it seemed to hold secrets. Charles had given it to Diana not long after their engagement, along with matching diamond earrings and a brooch, adorned with a swirling sapphire framed in platinum. The gesture seemed pure, a husband welcoming his bride into a dynasty, marking her transformation from Lady Spencer to Princess of Wales. The world swooned. She wore them as symbols of unity, of elegance, of royal favor. But what Diana never knew was that these jewels had a history far older and far more entangled than she was ever told. Whispers within the palace staff circled immediately. To the public, they were gifts. Behind closed doors, aides referred to them as family jewels, temporarily reassigned. The phrasing was deliberate, clinical. These weren't Diana's to own, merely to hold. In hushed meetings, their origins were traced not to a jeweler's workshop in the 1980s, but to Queen Alexandra's private collection, a suite Charles had once described as too important to disappear into the vaults. And yet, for decades, that's precisely where they had remained, locked away, untouched, a relic of another era. Until Charles had them discreetly removed, reset, and given to Diana. Or rather, loaned. Charles's connection to the pieces was never simple. They reminded him of a time before his mother's reign, before duty eclipsed desire. His attachment was nostalgic, perhaps even resentful. Gifting them to Diana may have been symbolic of a fresh start, but it also hinted at a subtle power dynamic, one she wouldn't recognize until it was far too late. She wore them proudly, draped in royal regalia at state banquets, receptions, and public engagements. Each time she stepped into the spotlight, the press marveled at her poise, her grace, her sparkle. But behind the adoration, the tension simmered. The brooch, in particular, became a quiet obsession for royal watchers. In the early days, Diana often pinned it high near her collarbone, a glittering centerpiece of her ensemble. But curiously, as the years passed, she wore it less and less. Eventually, it vanished from public view altogether. No explanation, no archival mention. It was as if the piece had been absorbed back into the monarchy, erased from her personal story. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion. Years after Diana's tragic death, Camilla appeared at a private royal function wearing a brooch startlingly similar in design, though no one dared say it outright. It wasn't just the shape or the gems, it was the weight of recognition. The same curved frame, the same royal blue gleam. The resemblance was uncanny and undeniable. For those who had followed Diana's journey, it wasn't just a brooch. It was a symbol of displacement. That single appearance sent tremors through those who remembered. It raised questions that the palace would never answer, and revived suspicions that had never truly disappeared. Had Charles reclaimed the jewels after Diana's death? Or had they never really left royal hands in the first place? But what Diana never knew was that her so-called gifts had never truly belonged to her. just like the love she thought she had secured. Most believe the royal jewels are housed within the Tower of London, but insiders speak of a different kind of vault. Hidden beneath Clarence House, guarded not by tradition, but by discretion. And within it, jewels with histories too tangled and too damning to be put on public display. Official records point the public toward the glittering spectacle of the crown jewels, beacons of ceremony, lineage, and untouchable prestige. But there is another collection, far less discussed, quietly curated away from the eyes of the public. This is not the stuff of coronations or investitures. This is where personal power is stored, reclaimed, rewritten. This is the private vault, a shadow inventory of jewels, each piece with a story the monarchy would rather forget than explain. The existence of this vault has never been confirmed, but too many insiders have pointed to it for it to be dismissed as rumor. Former footmen, discreet assistants, even visiting foreign dignitaries have spoken of an underground chamber beneath Clarence House, accessible only with dual keys, guarded not by tradition but by personal loyalty. Unlike the tower's gleaming showcases, this place holds pieces unfit for official narrative, gifts revoked, heirlooms entangled in scandal, symbols of broken promises. It was here, according to whispers from within palace walls, that Charles turned during the unraveling of his marriage to Diana. Separated not only by emotion but by agenda, Charles is said to have made several unregistered visits to Clarence House between 1993 and 1996. Some logs, insiders claim, list a false name, Mr. Auden, a nod perhaps to the poet who once wrote of love's failure to stop the clock. These visits, quiet and unannounced, were rarely about meetings. They were about retrieval. One former palace staffer, speaking on strict condition of anonymity, recalled seeing a velvet case removed from Diana's personal safe just weeks after the finalization of the divorce. It contained, they said, the sapphire suite, the same one that had dazzled the press, that had defined her image as the radiant young Princess of Wales. The removal was clinical, emotionless, as if history could simply be folded away and retitled. "We were told to prepare the Camilla pieces," the aide confessed. No further explanation, no ceremony, just quiet instructions and swift execution. This wasn't merely about reclaiming jewels, it was about erasing meaning, about taking symbols of one woman's love story and repurposing them for another. The vault beneath Clarence House became a graveyard of memory, a chamber where sentiment was sterilized and legacy rebranded. The monarchy could not afford sentimentality. It needed continuity. And in this quiet underground space, it found the means to do both, to bury the past while dressing the future in its remnants. Here, power isn't just inherited, it's enforced. Through silk-lined drawers and unsigned ledgers, through jewels that disappear from one woman's wrist only to reappear years later on another's neck, repackaged for public approval. The vault is more than a room. It is the embodiment of royal control, a place where emotion is locked away, not to be remembered, but to be rewritten. But while the vault held the jewels in silence, it couldn't contain the whispers that followed them. When Charles ascended the throne, all eyes were on the crown. But for those watching closely, it was the jewels Camilla wore that told the real story. A sapphire glinted at her throat, eerily familiar. To some, it was regal. To others, It was betrayal resurrected. It was meant to be a moment of unity, a new beginning for the monarchy after decades of upheaval. Charles, at last, was king. Camilla, once the outsider, now stood as queen consort. The cameras captured the grandeur, the tradition, the symbolism of continuity. But beneath the layers of ceremony, something unexpected shimmered. A sapphire choker, deep blue and unmistakable. Royal watchers, veterans of the Diana era, knew it instantly. They didn't need confirmation. They remembered. To the untrained eye, it was simply a necklace. But to those who had witnessed the tragic arc of Diana's life, it was a relic of pain and stolen grace. The resemblance was too precise. The size of the stone, the curvature of the setting, even the subtle diamond detailing, it all echoed the very piece Diana had once worn during her most high-profile engagements. The choker that had symbolized her royal identity, her poise, her power, was now wrapped around the neck of the woman who had once lived in the shadows. The press, either unaware or willfully blind, praised the look as a return to royal elegance. Headlines lauded Camilla's timeless sophistication, her regal bearing, her effortless adaptation to royal life. But behind the scenes, tension churned. William and Harry, both present at the coronation banquet, reportedly noticed the necklace immediately. One aide described William's reaction as tense, unreadable. Harry, according to sources close to the Sussex circle, was visibly rattled. The appearance of the choker wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a declaration. Questions erupted across social media and royal forums. Was it the same necklace Diana had once worn? Had it been hidden all these years, repurposed and returned under a new name? Or had Camilla simply commissioned a replica, knowing full well the emotional resonance it would trigger? The palace, in keeping with its tradition of strategic silence, refused to comment. No denial, no clarification. Just enough ambiguity to let the image sink in and the speculation fester. For Camilla, it was a quiet reclamation of space she had long been denied. The crown may have made her queen, but it was the jewels, the symbols of royal womanhood, that cemented her place. By wearing that sapphire, she wasn't just stepping into a role. She was stepping into a history previously defined by another woman. Diana's legacy wasn't being erased. It was being worn, reframed, rebranded. And in doing so, Camilla was no longer the interloper. She was the final chapter. But not everyone was willing to turn the page. For those who remembered the heartbreak, the scandals, the silences that followed Diana's cries for help, the sight of that necklace felt like a twist of the knife. A reminder that in the royal family, power is never truly lost. It's simply reassigned. But the jewels were only the surface. The real drama lay in the web of choices that led to their return. Royal love stories are never just emotional. They're negotiated, balanced, and traded like treaties. Long before Diana's divorce was finalized, a backroom agreement shifted the fate of her most prized possessions. And the cost? Silence. By the time the 1996 divorce was announced, the public believed Diana had taken control of her destiny. She had stepped out of the shadows of the monarchy, reclaimed her voice, and supposedly walked away with her dignity intact. But what they didn't see, what was never published in the sanitized press releases, was the cold exchange that took place behind the scenes. This wasn't a clean break. It was a settlement stitched together with clauses, conditions, and quiet compromises. At the heart of it all, the jewels, the official divorce agreement outlined finances, titles, access, but buried within it was a confidential provision, one Diana was reportedly pressured to accept, that involved the return of certain historic items. The language was vague, intentionally so, but the implications were clear. Any jewel deemed to have originated from the royal vaults, even if given to her by Charles as a personal gift, was subject to recall. The sapphire choker, the diamond brooch, the earrings once described as hers alone, they were reclassified. Not as keepsakes from a marriage, but as relics of a lineage she no longer belonged to. The legal gray area worked in Charles's favor. He'd gifted her the jewels, yes, but were they truly hers to keep? Or had they merely been loaned under the guise of affection? The distinction mattered now. And in that sterile legal language, Diana's history was quietly dismantled. One by one, the most iconic pieces associated with her image were reclaimed, returned, absorbed back into a system that sought not only to control the future, but to sanitize the past. In return, Diana received financial guarantees, security assurances, and the right to remain at Kensington Palace. But what she surrendered couldn't be measured in contracts. These jewels weren't just stones and metal. They were symbols of who she had become, of the love she once believed in, of the public identity she had forged through sheer presence and grace. And now, they were gone, taken not in anger, but in cold strategy, a quiet undoing. As Charles positioned himself for the next chapter, another operation began. Less visible, but no less calculated. Camilla's legal team, now emboldened by the shifting tides, began documenting which pieces might be rehabilitated. Not just inherited, but revived, polished, recontextualized. These were not Diana's jewels anymore. They were royal artifacts, soon to be worn by a different woman, under a different narrative, for a different purpose. It was a masterclass in control. The monarchy couldn't erase Diana from public memory, but it could absorb her symbols and redistribute them. It could place them where it wanted the eye to look, and in doing so, it robbed her legacy of exclusivity, stripping meaning from metal and memory from gems. But even after Diana was gone, her presence haunted the jewels, and those who dared to wear them. He was the future king. But William never saw the full picture. Not until years later, when a familiar sapphire passed from one velvet case to another. What was once his mother's symbol of strength was now being presented as a crown jewel for a different queen. Growing up within the palace walls, William was taught early that appearances mattered. That loyalty to the institution would, in time, supersede loyalty to anything else. But memory, especially the kind forged in grief, doesn't follow protocol. The images of his mother, framed in light and pain, wearing the sapphire choker with an elegance that silenced rooms, were not just photographs to him. They were fragments of something sacred. And so when Camilla appeared wearing a suite, nearly identical to what once belonged to Diana, something shifted. Not publicly, not in a statement, but within him. The relationship between William and Camilla was always delicate, civil on the surface, careful underneath. But the jewels exposed a fracture too deep to ignore. Private sources close to the family claimed that in the early 2010s, William was discreetly offered one of Diana's rings, one she had worn on diplomatic trips, perhaps as a gesture of inclusion. But he refused, not out of spite, out of conviction. "It's tainted," he reportedly said, because what had once symbolized love now reeked of manipulation. Royal duty demanded silence, but emotionally, the dissonance was becoming impossible to ignore. These were not just gems being recycled. They were emblems of a rewritten past. Camilla's public transformation was one thing, but seeing her draped in the very pieces that once defined Diana's image was another. It wasn't restoration. It was replacement. A quiet overwriting of legacy, cloaked in tradition. Kate, sensing the emotional weight of it all, made her own quiet stand. Behind palace doors, it's said she promised never to wear certain pieces from the Camilla collection, especially those linked directly to Diana. It wasn't an act of rebellion, but of reverence. A line drawn not in conflict, but in quiet solidarity with the memory of a woman who had shaped the nation's affection like no royal had before or since. The younger generation, now living under the shadow of both women, began asking a new kind of question. What is truly inheritance, and what is merely repurposed power? Where does legacy end and propaganda begin? For William, the jewels were no longer heirlooms. They were artifacts of a system that would honor and erase in the same breath. The very thing that bound the family together, tradition, had been used to sever meaning from memory. It reflected something bigger than jewelry. It was about identity, about history being adjusted in real time, about a monarchy that demanded everyone move forward, so long as they didn't ask who paid the price for doing so. William bore the title of heir, but the past clung to him like a second skin. Not just because of who his mother was, but because of how deliberately she had been replaced, stone by stone. But William wasn't the only one left haunted, because there was one piece that had never surfaced, and one woman who knew exactly where it was. Not all of Diana's jewels returned to the vault. One went missing entirely, a sapphire brooch set with tiny inscriptions. It was never seen again in public, but whispers say it was last worn by Diana on the day of her fateful final trip to Paris. The brooch was once part of the original suite gifted, or rather lent, to Diana early in her marriage to Charles. It wasn't the centerpiece, it wasn't photographed as often, but for those who looked closely, it held secrets no crown could outshine. Oval in shape, rich in sapphire and filigreed with diamonds, it had something no other royal piece did: an inscription. Delicate letters, just visible in magnified shots from the early 1980s. No one ever publicly revealed what the engraven said, but some believe it bore a phrase in Latin, perhaps a motto, perhaps a warning. Either way, it was deeply personal. And now, it's gone. The brooch made sporadic appearances over the years, tucked into silk blouses, pinned on coat lapels. Always understated, always with purpose. It was never lent, never replicated, never spoken of in press releases. But after Diana's separation from Charles, it disappeared from public view. Unlike other pieces reclaimed or catalogued by the palace, there's no record of the brooch's return. Not in inventories, not in wills, not in vault audits. It's as if it vanished into thin air. And then came the chilling revelation. One of Diana's former protection officers, long retired, speaking under condition of anonymity, shared something that sent a ripple through those who still watched the royal family with knowing eyes. He claimed that the night before her final trip to Paris, Diana had asked him to retrieve a handbag from Kensington Palace. Inside, tucked into the lining, was the sapphire brooch. Not displayed, not worn, just there. As if she couldn't bear to be apart from it, but also couldn't bring herself to display it again. It was never recovered, not from the car wreckage, not from her hotel suite. It wasn't on the official list of personal effects returned to her family. It simply vanished. And in its absence, theories bloomed. Was it stolen by someone in the chaos that followed her death? Was it buried with her in a quiet act of defiance, her own royal relic, shielded forever from reappropriation? Or did William recover it and lock it away, far from the eyes of the public or the grasp of a stepmother who now wore so much of what once defined his mother? What's clear is that Camilla has never worn anything remotely resembling the brooch, not even a distant cousin of it. And that, in a monarchy where jewels are endlessly recycled and repurposed, says everything. It suggests a boundary, an unspoken line not even the crown dares to cross. And so the brooch lingers in silence, never confirmed, never denied. A ghost in the royal collection, a symbol of what cannot be reclaimed, repolished, or reframed. It remains the one piece no one dares to touch. A relic not of royalty, but of resistance. But even as pieces vanished, others re-emerged, each one rewriting the story of love, betrayal, and image. In 2024, plans were drawn to showcase the most iconic royal jewels in a traveling exhibit. But certain pieces, specifically those tied to Diana, were mysteriously pulled last minute. No explanation, just silence. As if the monarchy couldn't risk what those gems might say without words. It was billed as a historic moment, an unprecedented public display of the monarchy's most treasured adornments. A way to modernize the institution's image, to bring the people closer to the glittering heart of royal tradition. The exhibit promised to showcase the evolution of royal women through the jewels they wore. Elizabeth's coronation diamonds, Margaret's scandalous tiaras, Camilla's rising collection. And yes, Diana's pieces were featured in the early promotional materials. Her sapphire choker, her diamond earrings, even the brooch that hadn't been seen since the 1990s. But then, in the days leading up to the official unveiling, those items quietly disappeared from the display list. No announcement, no adjustment to the catalog. They simply vanished. When pressed by journalists, the palace issued a flat, sterile response. Due to conservation concerns, certain pieces have been withheld from public view. It was a line designed to end questions, not answer them. But within the palace walls, the truth was far more complex and far more emotional. According to multiple sources, William and Harry had both voiced deep concern over how their mother's jewelry would be presented. Not because it was being shown, but because of who would be standing beside it. Because Camilla, reportedly, had planned to tour the exhibit personally. The optics were too dangerous. The possibility of Camilla standing before jewels once synonymous with Diana felt like a calculated affront, especially when Camilla had already worn several pieces in private. For William, it was a matter of legacy. For Harry, a matter of loyalty. And for the institution, it became a question of risk. So the pieces were pulled, not for conservation, but for containment. Behind the scenes, the power struggle was clear. Camilla's team reportedly saw the exhibit as an opportunity to solidify her narrative, one not just of acceptance, but of succession, of transition, of ownership. But Diana's shadow proved too long, too loud, even in absence. The removal of her jewels became the story. The silence around them spoke louder than any royal endorsement could. What was meant to be a celebration of heritage became a battlefield of memory. Because jewels don't just sparkle, they whisper. And sometimes, what they don't say is the loudest truth of all. And yet, the story refused to end there. Because sometimes, the past demands to be worn again. She stepped out of the carriage, the world watching, and around her neck, a sapphire choker that hadn't been seen in public for nearly 30 years. It was unmistakable. Not a tribute, not a coincidence, a reclaiming. And with it, the ghost of Diana stirred once more. The Platinum Coronation Banquet was designed to mark the closing of one royal chapter and the formal beginning of another. Yet, for many, it felt like déjà vu. As Queen Camilla descended into the grand hall, wearing that deep sapphire choker, cameras snapped in a frenzy, not for admiration, but recognition. The piece, long thought shelved or locked away, glinted like a whispered memory. To the public, it screamed of Diana. Within seconds, the comparisons began. Old photographs were resurfaced. Side-by-side images flooded social media. The same choker, worn by Diana at a gala in 1985. The angles were different. The face beneath the jewels changed, but the message was unavoidable. For many, it wasn't elegance. It was erasure. Not honoring Diana, but overwriting her. The sapphire had returned, yes, but on the wrong woman. Inside the banquet, emotion pulsed beneath the courtly stiffness. Those watching closely caught the shift in William's posture the moment Camilla appeared. Tension hardened his jaw. His eyes, fixed on the necklace for a moment too long, told a story that no words dared approach. Beside him, Kate sat composed, but cold. Witnesses described her as statuesque, unreadable, a silence not of diplomacy, but of resistance. If the crown was now Camilla's, this was the line Kate would not cross. She, too, remembered where that choker had come from, and who had bled for it. The palace, as expected, said nothing. No press release, no background briefing, not even a hint of acknowledgement. The silence was strategic, tactical. Let the public talk themselves in circles while the monarchy pushed forward, unbothered. But this time, the silence backfired. Instead of burying the past, it resurrected it. Diana's story was no longer frozen in tragedy. It had returned in defiance, wrapped around the very neck of the woman who had once lived in the margins. For years, the monarchy had tried to control Diana's narrative through aesthetics, by reclaiming the jewels, reassigning them, restyling them. But in doing so, they only amplified her presence. The choker, once a symbol of love and prestige, now became a symbol of unfinished reckoning. The public didn't see continuity. They saw conflict. They saw a monarchy still haunted by the woman it had failed, still unable to silence the story she left behind. Even longtime royalists were divided. Some defended the appearance as a gesture of unity, a way to bring the past into the present. But most saw it for what it was, a calculated choice, an unmistakable statement, and a misstep. Because history can't be rewritten with jewels. not when the world remembers who wore them first, not when pain has a longer memory than protocol. And while Camilla smiled and posed, wearing the sapphire like a crown within a crown, the air grew heavier, not with celebration, but with reckoning, because Diana's absence wasn't quiet that night. It roared. But even in death, Diana left one final act, hidden, quiet, and devastating. 10 years after her death, a handwritten letter was discovered, sealed, tucked inside a safe deposit box registered under Diana's middle name. Inside, a message, and an inventory, a list of jewels she'd hidden, and one line, underlined twice. Not for Camilla. Ever. The discovery came quietly, away from the palace, far from the press. A former solicitor, one of the last people Diana ever trusted completely, had kept the box sealed in accordance with her instructions. It wasn't time, she had said. Not yet. Only after a decade had passed. Only when William was ready. When the world had moved on enough to believe that the story was over. And only then could the truth be unwrapped. When the envelope was opened, it wasn't just a letter. It was an earthquake. Not in noise, but in meaning. The handwriting was unmistakable. The same sharp loops and hurried ink from notes Diana used to leave on pillows and lunchboxes. But this wasn't a farewell. It was a warning, a declaration, a final act of defiance. Inside was a detailed inventory, items never publicly recorded, never seen again after her death. Among them, the sapphire drop earrings Charles had given her on their 2nd anniversary. The brooch believed to have vanished in Paris. And, most surprisingly, a diamond tiara no one outside her inner circle knew she possessed. She had received it quietly, through her father's side, an heirloom not catalogued by the crown, and therefore hers to do with as she pleased. In the letter, she referred to it simply as the Spencer flame. But it was the message scrawled at the bottom that sent chills through the room. These are not to be worn. Not by her. Not ever. If you must, give them to the boys. But not for Camilla, ever. The line was underlined twice, the ink pressed deep into the paper. A final boundary. A last refusal. William reportedly received the letter in private. He said nothing publicly, no statement, no leak. But those closest to him noticed subtle changes. An uptick in his presence at Kensington. A new safe installed. A quiet shift in the pieces Kate wore, never overlapping with those on Camilla's rotation. The inventory had become more than a list. It was a shield. A vow he would honor not as a royal, but as a son. Camilla, for her part, has never acknowledged the letter's existence. Perhaps she doesn't believe it. Perhaps she does. But she's never reached for the Spencer flame, nor worn sapphire drops that match Diana's. Whether it's respect or restraint remains unclear. But the boundary Diana drew, even in death, has held. Quietly. Powerfully. In the end, Diana did what no royal protocol ever allowed. She made sure that a piece of her could never be rewritten. That her story, though silenced in life, would speak in death through the very jewels they once tried to reclaim. Not through headlines, not through scandal, but through silence and choice. The jewels may sparkle under palace lights, but for those who know, they carry weight. Stories of love given, love revoked, and the quiet war fought not with words, but with stones that never forget who wore them first.